Let's go back to the history books and look at the 2002-2003 season. So, coming out of that season and in the yearbook looking forward to 2003-2004, it's all about CBA. It is. And they talk about it right in the front page. Bam, there it is. Collective bargaining agreement. They know that it's coming up. The NHL can let the NHLPA know, hey, we're going to end this agreement. Otherwise, it'll just continue year over year the way it is. And the NHL is saying, we need cost certainty. That is what Gary Bettman's using as his word of the day, which is driving everybody nuts. Of course, we know that we'll end up with a whole year lost. I'm not sure what I'm going to do when I get to that point in this history series, but we'll see. So it expires September 15th of 2004, which of course happens because the NHL says we want out. The article states, however, there's going to be no hard salary cap, saying if Gary Bettman wants a hard salary cap, he wants cost certainty. Well, too bad. It's not going to happen. Yeah. So looking back, 15 years, the prevailing opinion was they're not getting a hard salary cap. These players are going to stick together, and they don't. They do for a full year. The stubborn attitude is there, but eventually they break, and we'll get to that. Top 10 players. Number 1's Peter Forsberg because he's extremely talented. Number 2, Nick Lidstrom. Number 3, Joe Thornton, who has his big season that year where he explodes onto the scene scoring-wise. Number 4, Marcus Naslund. That is his best year. 2002-2003, Marcus Naslund was absolutely at the apex of his career, and it would kind of fall apart after that. We're going to get into some dark times for the Canucks, starting with the next video in this series. Marty Brodeur at 5, Mario Lemieux at 6. So Mario still not playing full 80 games, doesn't matter. He's still top 10 in the players in the National Hockey League. Mike Modano, number 7. Dominic Hasek, number 8, even though he didn't play the year before. Yeah, so 2002-2003, he's retired. He would announce he was coming back for 2003-2004. The Hockey News goes, well, we're putting him in the top 10 players before he's played a game yet. That's what his name means at that stage. Joe Sakic at number 9, and Sergei Fedorov, who was joining the Ducks for that season, is at 10. Now, speaking of the Ducks, 2003, they lose in the Stanley Cup Finals in 7. This was a series that the home team won all 7 games. And I really, really wanted the Ducks to win this. They just couldn't win in New Jersey. New Jersey wins it. Of course, Korea leaves after that. That's the end of Korea in Anaheim. And, of course, we know that the Scott Stevens hit takes place, and Korea will never be the same. And that's kind of that dark cloud that overshadows things. Sergei Fedorov signs as a free agent in Anaheim. You expect big things from him. It's a mixed bag with Fedorov in Anaheim. It doesn't end particularly well. Jaguar, however, is a star. So Jean-Sébastien Jaguar, who's been known as a pretty good goaltender, becomes known as one of the top 5 goalies in the league after that tremendous run, that 7-game run, and he wins a Conn Smythe Trophy that year, despite the fact that they lose to the New Jersey Devils, who have Marty Brodeur in net for them. But everybody knows, without Jaguar, Anaheim is not anywhere near a Stanley Cup final. In Atlanta, Danny Heatley, Kovalchuk, and Kozlov. They combine for 100 goals. So they're the absolute guts of that team, because everything else, yeah, they have major depth issues, and their defense is kind of remarkably terrible. So this is a team that's seen us kind of on its way up, and they're a good young team. Pasi Nurminen was their goaltender. I like Nurminen. However, as a starter, he had his moments and had his bad ones as well. Atlanta's just a disaster, and Byron Dafoe went there, and it just didn't work out for Dafoe either. Boston, speaking of Dafoe's former location, Steve Shields is a complete and total flop. He is, I think his save percentage was .890 that year. Yeah, it was a bad season, and yet the Bruins make the playoffs. They lose in round 1 against the New Jersey Devils. They barely make the playoffs. The good news is Joe Thornton has 101 points, and Glenn Murray, who's known as Little Cam, that's his nickname, as in Little Cam Neely, has 44 goals. Glenn Murray is easily forgotten at this stage in time, but he was a pretty good goal scorer during an era where there weren't goals being scored. So, big season for Thornton, big season for Murray, and if they had goaltending, who knows what Boston might have done. But don't worry, because Raycroft is about to make his debut. That's where things get weird. Buffalo, the owner of the team and his sons are arrested. it's a bad sign for your team. And this is right around where there was talks about, are they going to stay in Buffalo? What's going to happen with the Buffalo Sabres in this market where, teams are spending through the roof, and Buffalo is going to lose money if they have to spend money like everybody else. Tom Golisano takes over as the owner. The team, meanwhile, on the ice, 72 points. Danny Briere joins the team late in the 2002-2003 season. And there's no indication right away of what's going to happen with him. But, of course, we know that he's going to be a key member of the Buffalo Sabres going forward. So it's a bit of a disastrous season. And when your owner's getting arrested, that kind of has an impact on the organization as a whole. Calgary is now suffered through 7 years of no playoffs. Yep, 7 years. And Roman Turek is their number one. He's not playing particularly well at times. His consistency's off. And their power play sits at 12.7%. That's abysmal. And that's a power play that has Jerome McGinley on it. So there are some serious problems with the Calgary Flames at this point. And 7 years of not making the playoffs will cause almost any fan base to lose their minds. With all due respect to fan bases that are currently going through that, or fan bases that will. Carolina, 2002 finals, 2003 no playoffs. Kevin Weeks is in as the number one as Artur Zerbe falls completely off the map. I did a video on Zerbe not that long ago. So Weeks, the goalie of the future, finally is the goalie of the present. He's the number one in Carolina. He would be good for them. But injuries are an issue, and especially when it comes to Rod Brind'Amour, who only plays 48 games that year for Carolina. For a team that's long on heart and short on top-end talent, having Brind'Amour out for that many games really hurts them. Chicago, they dropped 17 points. So the really good season they had the year before, it's a mirage. There's no playoffs, of course, and Theoren Fleury comes in and he flops with the Chicago Blackhawks. Not only that, but they go 9-18-4-3 after a January 19th strip club incident in Columbus. What are you guys doing? It's not like these are young guys either. These are veterans. Theoren Fleury, Phil Housley, and Tyler Arneson. Now, Arneson's younger, but Housley and Fleury should know better. During the season, they have an altercation with bouncers at a strip club in Columbus. And after that, the team does nothing. There's no discipline for them, nothing. And the whole team falls apart, and there's all kinds of talk about problems in the locker room. And yeah, when you've got guys going out partying at strip clubs during the season and getting into trouble, we know now what was going on with Theoren Fleury and just how ugly things got for him. But it was a distraction. It was a distraction and was part of a miserable season for Theoren Fleury. And so this is just, kind of a mess. Housley ends up, I believe, traded to Toronto. I don't know if those things are related, but yeah, he ends up out of town. And it's just Chicago's a tire fire at that stage. Colorado. Well, Colorado had a good season, regular season, and then they collapsed in round one. They had a 3-1 lead on Minnesota, and then they blew it. They lost the next 3 games. Minnesota enjoyed that so much they did it twice, and we'll get to that. So the Colorado Avalanche go out and sign Paul Kariya and Teemu Selanne for relatively cheap contracts. And they sign these guys with the idea that they're going to add Kariya and Selanne to what they have, and this is immediately going to make them Stanley Cup champions. It's not going to happen, but in theory it works. The problem is Patrick Roy retires after those playoffs. Patrick Roy, he didn't like how that Minnesota series ended. I don't know that necessarily influenced his decision at all. I think he'd already made up his mind, but it can't have helped. He looked human against the Minnesota Wild in those 3 losses. And so they're going to go to David Abisher, and that's going to have sort of a... Well, it's hard to go from Patrick Roy to almost anybody, but Abisher is not Patrick Roy. So they add Kariya and Selanne, which makes their offense absolutely fantastic, but their goaltending definitely takes a hit. Dallas, they're out in round 2 after a 111-point season, so you can look at this and say it's a big success. The problem is, in the offseason, they also lose Darian Hatcher, a heart and soul defenseman who was also their team captain. He leaves in the offseason. Marty Turco has arguably the best season of his career with a 1.72 goals against, a .932 save percentage. Tugnut kind of flops as the backup for him, so he ends up having to play more than he otherwise would have. but Turco has a really great season. This is right about where, though, Turco starts to get a reputation for not being very good in the playoffs, which bothered me. Still bothers me, because I didn't really put it on Turco. But yeah, there's a perception that Turco in big games in the playoffs isn't your guy. Detroit, they get swept in the first round by Anaheim. That was the most stunning first round upset I'd ever seen. Cujo, he flops. Curtis Joseph plays just ridiculously bad for Detroit. And you can tell right away there's buyer's remorse, and he has plenty as well. So what happens? Dominic Hasek, who'd been retired for a year, I'm back. Hey. So Hasek's back, and Legacy's the backup. Oh, and Cujo isn't traded yet. So Cujo's still part of the paid roster, but they know this just doesn't work. And at this point, it's either Stanley Cup or bust. And since they busted in the first round, they're going back to Hasek. The Oilers, they have 92 points, but they're out in round one versus Dallas. And this is where it starts to feel like they're spinning their wheels. They're able to put together a fast, young, talented team that can make that playoff run, but they can't do anything once they're in the playoffs. So getting to the playoffs, yep, they can get there. In the playoffs, they're fodder. And usually for the Dallas Stars. LA Kings, 78 points. Felix Potvin's magical run stops. He ends up being on his way to town. And Roman Cechmanek joins the team. Remember Cechmanek? No? No? All right. Cechmanek put up excellent regular season numbers for the most part. And then Sean Avery joins the Kings at the deadline. One of those ones that when he joined the team, it's sort of like, apparently he's a sandpaper guy. We had no idea a legend was going to be born in LA, that if he hadn't played in LA, I don't know if it would have happened. I can't say LA too many times or I'm going to start saying it like they do in Letterkenny. So I'm going to move along to the Minnesota Wild, who have their only trip to the Final Four that season. Yes, 2002, 2003. That's it. Minnesota Final Four, and yeah, after that, nope. They twice rallied from 3-1 down. So twice they were on the verge of being knocked out, and they came back and won. First against Colorado, then against Vancouver. It's magical until they meet the Anaheim Ducks. I'm going to say this, in all honesty, the series between Minnesota and the Anaheim Ducks was the most boring series of hockey I have ever watched in my entire life of watching hockey. You had two teams that both played the neutral zone trap, two teams that relied on counterattacks rather than actually making the attack themselves, and it was so hard to watch it. I can honestly say I fell asleep watching more than one game in that series. Gaborik, however, despite the neutral zone trappiness of it, he ends up with nine playoff goals. And Marian Gaborik is a star in the making in Minnesota. So a team that has its issues with scoring, Gaborik is a star on that team. Montreal, they fall back to earth. 77 points, and Jose Theodore's human. He had this incredible 2001-2002 season, and in 02-03, he falls back to earth. And there's some perception that maybe the superstar treatment he was getting and all of these appearances in the media might have taken his eye off the ball a little bit. But this is how it is in Montreal. You can go from hero to zero like that. I have watched it many, many times where a guy who's a really big star in Montreal, and then all of a sudden, now we've decided we're moving on from you. New Jersey, they win the cup despite the reality that Elias leads the team with 57 points. This is a team that is built for defense, scoring by committee, and we're kind of back in the trap. So while 95, no, it was the trap. 2000, more of a freewheeling. No, 2003, we're back to the trap. And New Jersey plays it to perfection. So the Stanley Cup final between New Jersey and Anaheim was exciting only from a point of view of, hey, can the Ducks actually win their first Stanley Cup? Will the mighty Ducks of Anaheim be your Stanley Cup champions, or will it be the Devils for a third time? And it's the Devils. But there were some slow games in that finals too. Wow, it was tough. The Islanders, they fired Peter Laviolette. And they fire him after they make the playoffs for the second straight year. They fire him because they barely eke their way into the playoffs. I'm not sure if anybody showed Mike Milbury their payroll, and that the fact that Laviolette could get this team near the playoffs, much less into them, is a miracle considering their payroll. But Milbury makes his 7th coaching change since 1995 and brings in Steve Sterling to replace Peter Laviolette. Yeah, that Peter Laviolette that's now coach of the Nashville Predators, who's pretty well respected league-wide. For every good decision Milbury makes, there's 2 more bad decisions he'll make somewhere else. And of course, we all know that the Islanders don't exactly flourish after that either. So firing Laviolette was just weird. I still think that. The Rangers, they are the number 1 payroll in the NHL, and they're still not a playoff team. That says a lot. Money, we got lots of that. We'll spend lots of money. We'll buy every veteran player you can imagine. Now, knowing what we know now about hockey, it doesn't make any sense to go out and buy every veteran 30 years of age or older, since they're going to start to diminish in returns at that stage. You're going to be paying a lot of money and getting less points out of them than other teams that have kids that are in their early 20s. Lindros ends up with 19 goals after going to the New York Rangers, so he is largely a flop. It's not Lindros' fault. The one thing I'll say with Lindros is, at this point, his effectiveness, after all the concussion problems he's had, it is greatly diminished. This is no longer the Eric Lindros of the Legion of Doom times in Philly. This is a completely different player. And Dan Blackburn is a complete flop as a backup for them. So Mike Dunham's brought in. Dunham plays relatively well, but Blackburn's a flop. And so there's some talk about, well, they bring in UC Markkanen so that Blackburn can get some time in the American League to get better. It's not going to work out for Blackburn at the NHL level. Ottawa, they make it to round 3. And then they lose to the New Jersey Devils. And it's close. And in a playoffs where there's a lot of trapping and clutching and grabbing and not a lot of scoring, Ottawa's the one hope you have. Ottawa's the one team that you can kind of look at and say they kind of freewheel out of the Final Four. But while Aleem has a strong year, and he does, they just come up short against the New Jersey Devils. So the Senators, close, seen as contenders and likely to be champions at some point, they just fall short. Philly, 107 points. But they lose in the first round, and Roman Cechmanek is seen as a big part of the reason why they lose in the first round. I said Montreal turns on players quickly. Philly can be brutal. Of all of the fan bases in the NHL, there's a lot that can be brutal to players on their own team. Philly can be just nasty. So Cechmanek's out. He's gone to LA. They bring in Jeff Hackett. So we'll see what happens with Hackett, because Hackett ended up going over to Boston, and that didn't quite work out for him. So Hackett's looking for a bounce back year in Philly in 2003-2004. St. Louis, they have 7 goaltenders play. So this year we saw that record broken, where a team played 8 goaltenders. This was the season we saw 7 goalies play for the St. Louis Blues. They're out in round 1. So again, they're near 100 points. They're a good team with a good roster. And then when the playoffs roll around, well, we're done. We're just going to go home now. We're finished. Yeah, no, we're not going to worry about playoffs. We don't really do playoffs. And Pronger plays a grand total of 5 games that year due to injury. So it's a rough year all around, and it definitely doesn't help that Chris Pronger's missing from the blue line for most of that season. St. Louis, they spun their wheels for a very long time. Tampa ends up recording a team record with 93 points that year. And Nikolai Habibulin has 30 wins. And you see the rise of guys like Richards and LeCavalier, and Marty St. Louis has a pretty good 70-point season as well. So this is a Tampa team that's going to find themselves that formula, win themselves a championship, just not yet. They do get out of the first round that year, which is unusual, and it gives them a taste for what's going to be coming soon in Tampa. Toronto, 98 points. I said it before, I'll say it again. Toronto was a good team at this stage of the game. And getting rid of Cujo turned out to be brilliance on their part. But they have a really weak blue line. So Thomas Caberlet, who is their number 1 guy in the blue line, and you've got Brian McCabe back there too. The idea is if something happens to Caberlet, this whole blue line sucks. And so while Belfour plays great, Belfour puts up really strong numbers. I think he had a .922 save percentage that year. The blue line in front of him isn't very good. And that's Toronto's problem. They have explosive talent up front. They have McGillney playing up front. He seems to be rejuvenated as a member of the Leafs at this stage, but the blue line is their main concern. That's something that happens with Toronto at times. Vancouver, 104 points. What a great year. I talk about seasons that make me happy or angry. This was the angriest I ever was as a Canucks fan. That meltdown versus Minnesota was absolutely embarrassing. And what was embarrassing about it was Game 7, where it was just a complete and total shambles by the Vancouver Canucks. This would foreshadow how things would go for Vancouver, how things would go for Cloutier. And rumors that Cloutier was playing hurt during these playoffs made me even angrier, because it's like, hey, if you're hurt, why don't you sit down and let your backup go in, because you're hurting us by playing. And it starts the reputation for guys like Naslund that during the playoffs they can't get it done. This is where we start talking about, well, is Naslund really a playoff leader, or are the Canucks simply not going? They're just going to be a good regular season team and not very good in the postseason, and that's kind of where it ends up for that core. It's a really tough setback, and it's a foreshadowing of just how dark things are going to get for Vancouver, and that was a tough one. I remember before Game 7, I was very nervous because I knew Minnesota was going to win it. And I had people telling me, oh, come on, they're not going to blow a 3-1 lead. Come on. And I'm like, they've done it. It's 3-3. Here we go. They're going to lose Game 7. It's that thing that people get mad at me for, right? And so, yeah, people were mad at me. And before the game started, I remember my ex saying, put the Minnesota Wild in the penalty box. And my son, who's, 3 at this time, saying put Bertuzzi in the penalty box. My son said put Bertuzzi in the penalty box, and I think Bertuzzi had a couple of penalties in that game, and it was a mess. So I guess my son knew something we didn't. But anyways, there you go. The 2002-2003 season. It was a fun one for some teams, not for some others, and for me, as a fan of Boston, Dallas, Vancouver, it was rough. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing right through. You just tapped upon this video. And that's it. You guys are now up to 2003 in these history videos.